Welcome to part 2 of my Capcom and the Sega Dreamcast series. In this episode, we will be looking at 10 more games that Capcom published, developed, or both for Sega's much beloved 6th generation console. Most companies tend to have an ebb and flow to their games, some being great, others not so much. Yet Capcom shows here that they just kept on giving when it came to Dreamcast releases. While fighting games remain the central theme of their products, they also published some shoot-'em-ups and adventure games. Quality remained high across the majority of these releases, and there is something here for everyone. I hope you guys enjoy Capcom and the Sega Dreamcast, Part 2. In March of 2000, Capcom published the Psychio-developed Gunbird 2. I was torn whether to include this or not since Virgin Interactive published it in Europe, but it has Capcom-related content, so here we go. It's the sequel to the popular vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up Gunbird, and retains many of the elements that define that experience. You get a random order for the first few stages, and there are 2 exclusive characters here. Morrigan from the Vampire series, and another from the shoot-'em-up Samurai Aces. I love the little details in the animation here. There is always something in the background going on, and it all has great color and definition. I also appreciate that instead of going hardcore pre-rendered like so many other 2D games at the time, this one stays true to its roots and retains that hand-drawn look. It does have some really strange bouts of slowdown here and there, and compared to some of the other 2D shooters on the Dreamcast, its graphics are overall a bit tame. Fortunately, it does have some excellent difficulty options, which allows lesser skilled players to manage its otherwise challenging gameplay. It has multiple endings as well, and the great 2-player co-op is back. It's been released on many other platforms since, but the Dreamcast edition is still a fun and enjoyable entry to the genre. Also in March of 2000, Capcom released the highly coveted sequel, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes. This was released in Japan right alongside the Naomi-based arcade version, and even features compatibility with it via the VMU. This one seeks to radically change a great many things about the Versus games as we had known them. Instead of the 2-on-2 based tag matches we had seen for years, this brings the total up to 3 versus 3. It also added a ton of characters to the roster, and even more you can unlock. It allows you to get help from your partners during the match, and it adjusted the venerable 6-button fighting interface down to 4 main attack buttons and 2 assist options. The visuals receive a pretty big overhaul here as well. Gone are the 2D backgrounds from the other games, replaced with fully animated 3D polygon backdrops. Needless to say, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was easily the biggest step up in the Versus series in regards to changes, particularly that massive 50+ character roster. The Japanese release also featured network competitive play on Capcom's match service, and you actually needed the experience from that and arcade play to open up all the unlockables in the game. This was dropped from the other versions of the game due to a sharp decline in Western arcades, and the fact that none of them featured network multiplayer of any kind. I am a big fan of this game, but I do have a few problems with it. First, the characters are noticeably blurrier than the backgrounds. While Capcom gave us those at a nice 480p resolution, the character assets appear to be much lower. This lends the game an uglier overall presentation than the games before it, despite the cool backdrops. I'm also not a fan of the music in this game at all. This was a major step back in quality, full stop. I mean, it doesn't fit the game at all, and the music in the first Marvel vs. Capcom absolutely slaughters it. Those two nitpicks aside, this is a great game loaded with content and features, and one of the more prolific fighters on the system. April of 2000 brought a sequel to the innovative arena-based fighter Power Stone, and this new one pushes things even further. Here we see more characters and a much more involved story full of choice as to how you tackle things. You get to choose your stage order, and boy did they redesign things here to be an improvement. Gone are the ho-hum square boxes of the original, now replaced by dynamic environments that change and evolve as you fight. Airships that blow apart, stages that scroll, and even stages you have to climb to survive. The basic formula remains similar. Collect the Power Stones to gain access to new abilities and eliminate your foe. Items and weapons have been jacked up as well, and there is a ton more here to attack with. The stages themselves are often a weapon now, always throwing things at you to keep you on your toes. There are even screen-filling boss battles to contend with now. Capcom even added 4-player simultaneous multiplayer, which takes this game from great to straight up amazing. The outstanding visuals are just icing on the cake. All that equals one of the finest sequels on the platform, and I'd even recommend it to those that may not have found the first game to their liking. It's so improved and has so much new content, it's almost like an entirely different genre. It's another Naomi-based game, and I highly advise you give it a try.
The sky is falling.
In June of 2000, Capcom unleashed its newest update, Third Strike for Street Fighter III. This standalone game had numerous changes from the previous two entries, including more characters, a modified parry system, how you throw and taunt, and changed a bunch of the existing character attributes. The result is often considered the best version of the game, and I quite enjoyed it myself. Many people complain that the Dreamcast version has issues that make it feel different from the arcade, and while that may be true, it wasn't anything I couldn't adjust to, and it certainly didn't impact my enjoyment of it. The character roster is huge now, especially compared to the very first iteration of Street Fighter III. I always dug the fact you could choose who you wanted to fight next, and thankfully that returns, as does your choice of super combo art when you choose your fighter. That great animation of the first two entries is again well represented, and the visuals themselves look pretty good, sharper than both the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions of the game. If you are trying to gain tournament level skills, you'll want to play with a version more in line with those expectations. But if you play fighting games just to have fun, the Dreamcast edition here will do just fine. It has different display modes for those that have the means to display them, so be sure to try out each one. In August of 2000, Capcom released the bold Naomi experiment, Spawn in the Demon's Hand for the Dreamcast. Basically, they took the idea behind Power Stone, a multiplayer arena fighter, and injected the insanity of the Spawn IP into it. The result was a 4-player bloodbath that allowed you to use weapons, hand-to-hand combat, and your environment to gain victory. There are 3 modes to play: a boss attack that allows up to 2 players to battle the CPU and its minions, a battle royal mode that pits 4 players against one another, and a team battle option. The potential here was definitely strong, but it's held back by a few things that can really affect your enjoyment of it. The camera goes nuts when things get hectic, and you'll need to be constantly adjusting the angle to see what's going on around you. It's easy to move into a position where you can't see attacks coming, and with some arenas being so closed in, this can be infuriating as you get your ass handed to you. There are also stages with insta-deaths, and falling into those because you couldn't see where you were going only adds to that frustration. Fortunately, the graphics are outstanding, particularly the main cast and the textures, and the music suits the fight. And that's where this game ultimately excels, its excellent presentation. If you can find a few friends to join you, that may be enough to make this one a keeper. In August of 2000, Capcom released the Japanese exclusive Vampire Chronicle for matching service. This was a mixture of the 3 vampire games, Vampire, Vampire Hunter, and Vampire Savior. It uses the core assets from Vampire Savior, but you choose the rules of how your characters play. These rules will govern things like how the life bar is handled, how your specials and supers work, and even how your combos are done. You get the full list of combatants from the Vampire Savior universe, and as the name suggests, you had the option of network multiplayer on Capcom's dedicated service in Japan. Other than that, you likely know this game extremely well from the other available versions of it across the PlayStation and Saturn. The presentation is top-notch in both the sound and visual department. The animation you expect from a port of this quality is there, and I always love the music from these games. Some of it is serious and dark, some of it light and fun, all of it fantastic. I'd say if you have the Saturn version of Savior, this isn't going to blow you away, but if you like the Dark Stalker games, this is a great one to own for your Dreamcast. In September of 2000, we finally got a dream come true with the 2 biggest names in the fight game going head to head in Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000. This was initially designed on the Naomi and ported down to the Dreamcast soon thereafter. This takes the idea of the previous Versus games and changes things up a bit. It employs the ratio system, which basically applies a numerical value to the fighters and assigns them a class. Each team has 4 points to fill, and this can lead to a combination of just 2 fighters to as many as 4 depending on their number value. This makes the fights of this one truly unique. Will you take a team of 4 low-tier guys all the way, or will you choose the powerhouse players and wreak havoc on your foes? The cast mainly consists of Street Fighter and King of Fighters players, though we do get the random entries like Morrigan from Darkstalkers. You also get to choose how your game is set up by choosing the Capcom or SNK groove, which basically determines your super meter. Capcom is similar to the Alpha series, while SNK is similar to the King of Fighters 98 Extra mode. Capcom also adopts the 4 attack button interface from Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for this one. I absolutely love the way this game looks. The backdrops you fight against are gorgeous, and much of the SNK artwork is as well. Capcom sort of skimped on the Street Fighter side and mainly used assets from the previous games, but it isn't like those characters look bad anyway. The special effects like rain, lens flares, and shadows really add to the look and feel of the presentation, and just ends up being stellar start to finish. Also in September of 2000, Capcom ported Dino Crisis to the Dreamcast. Next Tech would do the job here, and the results are a bit mixed. First and foremost, Dino Crisis is an excellent game. I loved how it used the Resident Evil style of storytelling and gameplay, but gave us fully 3D environments to explore and battle in. As the name suggests, some asshole thinks it's a good idea to bring dinosaurs into the future via time travel, and you guessed it, everything goes to hell. Now you and your team are trapped on an island just crawling with the things, and you'll need to find keys, cards, weapons, ammo, and more to see it through. The story is told through exploration and cinemas, and you have the choice of which actions you want to do, which can lead to various different endings. This does use the classic Resident Evil tank controls, though it's been tweaked a bit with great new features like moving with your gun drawn for faster attacks. Otherwise, you'll be fighting for your life and trying to find a way out of your situation, very similar to Capcom's Zombie Classic. The letdown ultimately comes in the port itself. Because the environments were polygon-based here, these characters look noticeably less detailed than their Resident Evil counterparts on the PlayStation, and that carries over to the Dreamcast version. The problem with that is now everything is bumped up in resolution, which means every crappy low polygon character and object sticks out like a sore thumb. I really wish at least the main character had been redone slightly to improve the visuals a bit. Outside of that complaint, Dino Crisis kicks all sorts of ass, and I can't recommend it enough. In November of 2000, Capcom published another Takumi Corporation developed shoot-'em-up, Mars Matrix Hypersolid Fighting. This is a vertically scrolling shooter that uses pre-rendered sprites and backgrounds. The gameplay is fairly simple. You have three main ways to attack and defend yourself. The first is the standard rapid fire that allows you to spray death and destruction on your enemies. The second is a close-in cannon that allows you to do more damage to enemies that are on top of you. The third is kind of a shield that allows you temporary invulnerability that also absorbs enemy fire all around you. This can then be charged and cut loose as a nuke-style attack to down multiple enemies at the same time. I hadn't played Mars Matrix in quite some time, and the 45 minutes I captured it here was a gruesome experience from the moment I pressed the start button and chose my ship. This game is hard, man, and I mean really hard. The default difficulty saw me spit out all my lives and continues by the third stage, and playing it again in the slightly different arrange mode changed little from that. You'll need to put in some time here to recognize enemy patterns and where you should and shouldn't be on the screen at any given time. Like Gigawing before it loves to dump those bonus icons all over the screen, something I've never appreciated much. Unfortunately, it didn't get a release in Europe, but it's a solid shooter though. Looks good enough, and I did like the gameplay. It'll challenge the hell out of you, but it certainly has the quality to justify it. Our last game for this episode was released in November of 2000 as well, the awesome Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This adventure followed Jill Valentine from the first game in her efforts to escape Raccoon City and its bioweapon-infested streets. As expected, everybody and their grandmother is trying to kill you, and what can go wrong does. You'll also need the standard keys and weapons to progress from place to place, and you will receive some help along the way. The tank controls of the two previous games is back, though you do see some nice upgrades like automatically going up and down steps and a dodge mechanic that can help you out of tight situations. Unlike Part 2 where you were trapped in the police station for much of the game, Part 3 has Jill all over the city. You still need to deal with doors and blocked areas, but this game feels less claustrophobic than before. There are loads of costumes to dress up in, and the easy mode gives you an arsenal to battle your enemies with. As the title would indicate, the Nemesis makes his terrifying appearance here. This dude doesn't respect boundaries at all, and is always trying to impose his will on you. From your very first meeting, he is a worthy foe and one that is often better avoided than battling it out at every encounter. The graphics and sound translate well to the Dreamcast, and even the controller works well with it. If you had fun with the others, you'll want to dig into this one as well. There are multiple choices to make during your game that will affect your ending, assuring replay value for many hours. Just be sure to pick one because indecisiveness can lead to an insta-death. There is a remake coming for this soon, so this is a great one to revisit in the meantime.
Jill! Brad! We've got to... Jill! Help! No!
Like our last batch of Capcom goodness, most of these games support the VGA box, and most of them were released in every major territory, a stark contrast to Capcom's games on the Sega Saturn. You'll also notice that the quality is again top-notch nearly across the board. The weakest link in this batch is Spawn in the Demon's Hand, and even that will appeal to a great many people thanks to its IP and crazy battles. The nice thing about many of these is that the Japanese versions are rather inexpensive, sometimes as little as a quarter of their Western counterparts. This leads me to recommend either a Japanese Dreamcast or a way to play every region's games. You also have the option of burning a copy should you want to try before you buy, something I always recommend when a game goes for well above retail. If you have enjoyed this series, I have great news. The third and final part will be released soon. It will cover the final games Capcom released for the Dreamcast, including a few of its RPG and strategy games that remain Japanese exclusive. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.